Have you or someone you know been diagnosed with ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, or just simply ADD, Attention Deficit Disorder? In today's video, we're going to talk about some of the strengths you may have as a player with this diagnosis. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges you may face as a player, and I'm going to give you some tips on things that you can do to help mitigate this, or even suggest to another player who you think may have this. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to the Maple Table. My name's Nathaniel. This is a channel where we discuss lore around some of your favorite role-playing games such as Starfinder, Werewolf the Apocalypse. We also talk about player tips and GM tips to help broaden your games, create better worlds, and better players and better GMs. This type of content isn't something that I normally talk about, the ADHD realm, especially as it relates to tabletop gaming. The reason that I wanted to touch on this is due to, I guess, my own personal story. As recently as November of 2020, I received an official diagnosis of ADHD for myself. I'm in the hyperactive stream. As I've been doing some research on this, what it means for myself, how it has affected my daily life, keep in mind, I haven't got an official diagnosis until my mid-30s. It has, however, made the rest of my life make a lot more sense. Things that were very difficult for myself and not so for someone who would be considered neurotypical has always bothered me, and I never was able to draw the connection as to what was happening with this. So over the last few months, while I've been researching and learning about this, hyperfixation, that's one thing that us ADHD or ADD people are very good at. The whole process has been very liberating for myself. Without going into too much detail, as I don't want this to be an ADD explanation video, there's lots of those on the internet. I will have a couple of links in the description below if you want to know more about what it is and how it affects the brain. The goal for today is to highlight the strengths, highlight the challenges, and give tips and tools for those who have this diagnosis or have this, I'm going to call it a condition, as I don't want to call it I don't feel that it's a disability. I really don't. And I feel calling it that is a huge disservice to anyone who has the diagnosis. And there seems to be way many more people who have this that are playing Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop role-playing games just in general than I originally thought. For the sake of simplicity for this video, I'm just going to refer to ADD, ADHD simply combined as ADHD. That's just what I'm going to be doing from here on out. As an ADHD player, or maybe you have one at your table but you are not yourself, what are some strengths that this player, or this type of player, will likely have? Creativity would be one hallmark of this. It doesn't necessarily mean that every person with ADHD is creative. However, it's a common trait. Tabletop role-playing games are sandbox by nature. They are open-ended. In my opinion, a good GM or a good dungeon master will create problems that don't have a fixed solution. And this works really, really well for an ADHD player because of that creativity and the nonlinear thinking that tends to come along with that. Very often, an ADHD player will have a very different problem-solving pathway that happens in the brain because it's non-linear. This means that as a player, you are likely very creative or finding creative ways to use different abilities or combine different spells or mixing rules together. You are likely very good at this. And maybe not necessarily in the aspect of a min-maxed character, but definitely something that is uncommon. If this is you, it is a feature, it is not a bug. Embrace it. One tip that I might give to someone who has this and maybe has 100 character concepts just running all up in your head. Get a notebook or something you can write on, preferably writing, not digital, preferably on paper. There's just something about writing that gets things from here and onto paper out of your head, and it clears things up. If you have 100 different character concepts, write them down. They will be messy, they will probably be disorganized, but put it down. You will have done a brain dump and it will be out of here on paper, and then you can look at that paper or reference it later. This is called a brain dump. It has 100% helped me, and I very highly suggest that this is something that you look into for yourself. You can't really see these on my bookshelf, but I have a lot of these, and I've only just started doing this recently, and it really, really helps. Another strength that you may have as an ADHD player is excitement. Whether it's you're trying to get our buy-in on an idea that we'll get excited for with you, or whether we're excited about a strange character concept, like a Skittermander with the dragon-blooded theme, who is a vanguard. Now, being an ADHD player or having one at your table can come with some challenges as well. The first and the most obvious one could be what I would call disruptions. As someone who has ADHD, I find that I sometimes cut people off, finish sentences for them because my mind is working faster than theirs and I want them to get to the point. This is not necessarily a good trait to have. It's something to be aware of that we can do, and really being aware of it allows you to start to work on that. As hard as it is, let them finish it. When it comes to inattentiveness, there really is not a lot you can do around this. There are some tips that we can cover that might help keep the mind engaged, but know that this is something that will always be a struggle, and for other people at the table, please don't take it personally. It is 100% not a reflection of you, unless of course you're boring. From the outside, it can appear that an ADHD player who is not currently the center of attention disengages completely. It is possible to happen. As a player, when it's not your turn to shine, if you don't have miniatures in front of you, try to keep a visual picture in your head. This is what I have found helps me quite a bit, is there's a constant movie playing in my head of things that are being described, things that are happening. When you're starting to lose focus or become disinterested or disengaged, that is a sign that the brain is not getting enough stimulus. It is not getting enough of what it needs. And as an ADD or ADHD person, our brains need much more stimulus. GMs can help with this by creating environments, music, background sounds. There's lots of programs that create this atmosphere. Having that will help because it's another level of stimulus. As a player, it's not your job to control the soundscape or to control the atmosphere. That is part of the GM's job. What you can do for yourself to prevent this from happening, I would even suggest having a little doodle pad. Do something that keeps your hands busy, but still listening to what's happening around you. If you're not an artist or if you don't like to doodle, having a fidget toy, a quiet fidget toy, something that is not clicky, that does not make sounds, that will become disruptive to everybody else. One other thing that I suggest that you do as a player, provided you have the space to do it, get up and move. Walk around. Turn in place. Just even the act of standing, even if space is limited, provided you're playing in person, is extremely helpful. You can start to move. Feel free to act as your character. This can more deeply immerse you into your game, and don't worry about feeling silly. It may feel silly to do it. This is role-playing. Standing and moving frequently will give your brain that extra stimulus that it needs. If you're playing online, this is more difficult to do. I would still suggest getting up out of your chair if you're playing online. Mute yourself so that you're not disrupting anybody else when you stand up from your chair, but can still keep the speakers going or keep your headset on so that you can still hear what's going on. And speaking of playing online, you need to minimize your distractions. There's certain things that will have to happen on screen and that you will need to have up there on screen, character sheets being one of them, and whatever tabletop service you're using, or if you're doing theater of the mind through any voice chat service, this could potentially be a little bit more of a challenge for you as the player. And even if you are playing online, I would still suggest making physical notes. Always have a notebook with you. This will help you in life, not just with your games, but with just everything else as well. I find that to be extremely useful for myself. When you're making notes, make them short, make them concise, and I would say no more than 2 or 3 sentences, at most. I've been experimenting with some different campaign style notes, campaign journaling as it were. If this is something that would be of interest to you, then please let me know in the comments below. And if you do none of these things, if you take no tips away from the video today, please take at least this one. When you are marking things on your character sheet for a stat or a feat or some special ability and you need to know how it works, rather than trying to write and fit all of that information into your character sheet, which can be difficult, note down the page number and the book from whatever system you're playing that particular bit of information can be found. This will help you when you need to look something up. It will help your DM because if they have the books, then you can just say, oh yes, it's on this book, this page, and it's right there and we can make a ruling. No more flipping, flip. If you do nothing else, do this. So what are my final thoughts on ADHD and players? Being that I am one, I'm pretty biased, I guess. I view this as an incredible strength, an incredible creative opportunity. There are things that, as an ADHD person, that I will be incredibly good at. There are things that I will never be good at. And knowing that and accepting that has come very quickly and very easily for me. It may not so for you. And just because I may not be strong in certain areas of my life, that is not something to be upset over, because you will be definitely strong in other areas or other aspects of your life. Embrace it. Own it. I have heard so many times in the last 6 months, just as I've been researching and learning about what this means for myself, I have heard it referred to as a superpower. And in this, I would agree. Know what it is for you. Know what your quirks are, because it is different in every person. Some things that I've talked about in this video may not apply to you, and that's okay. Be open, be honest, have that communication, have that dialogue with not only your other players. If that makes you uncomfortable, at least have it with your GM and your dungeon master. And if you can't trust them to have that conversation, is this really a group that you want to be playing with anyways? The next time I talk about this, I would like to come at it from the GM perspective and having an ADHD GM. Believe it or not, if you have this, being a GM is probably going to come easier to you than being a player. There's just so many more things that you have to be aware of. It forces you to be engaged. But that is going to be a conversation to have another day. There is a particular group of people who have shown some incredible support to the channel and really allow me to be a creative person and really support this. And I'm talking about my patrons: Autumn Alchemist, Orbs McMillans, RRSPQ, Ducky, Vox, Caneroot, Warpony, Get of Math Rocks, BA Bravo, Arukvin, The First Layer, Bones Malone, Westheimer, and Ain't No Waifu. Thank you all for your support. If you would like to join them on my list of patrons, then please check out the link to Patreon in the description below. If you would like to learn more about running the game, I have a playlist up on the screen for you now. My name's Nathaniel. This has been The Maple Table. Thanks for stopping by, everyone.